What do you think I should say tonight? I've ever gotten, because it's from this institution that represents these people, us, people of color.
On a February night in 2025, Dave Chappelle stepped onto the stage at the NAACP Image Awards and delivered a message that many believed was about far more than an acceptance speech. After years of watching Mo'Nique fight one of Hollywood's most controversial battles, Dave finally addressed the kind of pressure he says the entertainment industry puts on people who refuse to play by its rules. His words sounded encouraging, but many heard them as something else entirely. So what was Dave Chappelle really saying? And why did his message resonate so deeply with Mo'Nique's story? Join us as we uncover the truth behind one of Hollywood's most talked-about controversies. The industry that slammed all doors, all shut. On March 7, 2010, Mo'Nique won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for her performance as Mary in Precious. The performance was devastating. It was a portrayal of a violently abusive, psychologically shattered mother that required a commitment to darkness that very few actors are genuinely willing to make, and that Mo'Nique delivered with such complete absence of self-protection that viewers found themselves unable to look away even when what they were watching was genuinely difficult to witness. She was spectacular, and the Academy confirmed it. The room stood for her giving accolades. Seeing that her sacrifice didn't go to waste, she stood at the podium with her Oscar and delivered a speech that was warm and completely herself. It was the night that should have launched the next phase of one of the most singular careers in Black American entertainment. What happened instead is one of the most frequently discussed cases of industry retaliation in Hollywood's recent history. The trouble began during the Precious Awards campaign, the months of press appearances, screenings, industry events, and promotional work that studios invest in to build Oscar momentum around films they believe can win. The promotional campaign is not technically mandatory. It is, however, expected. It is the unwritten agreement between talent and studio that says, "We made this film together. We will promote this film together. And the prize at the end of that promotion, if it comes, benefits all of us." Mo'Nique said no. She refused to participate in the unpaid promotional work that the Precious campaign required of her. Her position was principled, and she stated it clearly. She had been paid for her work as an actress. The promotional appearances were additional labor for which she was not being compensated. She was not going to provide free labor for a studio's awards campaign. Lee Daniels, Tyler Perry, and Oprah Winfrey, three of the most powerful Black figures in the entertainment industry, all of whom had been instrumental in bringing Precious to the screen, warned her directly that refusing would cost her. All three of them, separately, told her that the industry did not tolerate this kind of resistance to the unwritten rules of how awards campaigns worked. Despite the threats, she stood her ground. She won the Oscar, and then, by every measurable marker available to anyone tracking a career, the industry walked away from her. They walked away in the way it always happens when Hollywood decides it is done with someone. Quietly, through the accumulating absence of phone calls that do not come, meetings that do not get scheduled, opportunities that go to someone else without explanation.
She's still furious about not getting high-profile work in Hollywood following her Best Supporting Actress win 7 years ago for the film Precious.
Mo'Nique had won the most prestigious acting award in the world and was suddenly unable to book the roles her talent warranted. She told The Hollywood Reporter directly what happened next. Lee Daniels called her 6 or 7 months later and told her she had been blackballed. She asked why. He said, "Because you didn't play the game." She asked what game. He gave no response. Lee Daniels confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter that Mo'Nique had been blacklisted. He said her demands through Precious were not always in line with the campaign and that this had soured her relationship with the Hollywood community. He called her a creative force and a friend in the same statement in which he confirmed she had been blacklisted by the industry. Mo'Nique has also spoken about her blackballing with a consistency across many years of interviews that makes her account one of the most fully documented cases of industry retaliation in the modern entertainment era. She has revealed everything she could and had refused to accept the frame that her own career choices were responsible for what happened to her, because her choice to decline unpaid promotional labor was a choice that any reasonable person would recognize as defensible. The industry's response to that choice was not about the merits. If Monique's story asked what happens when someone refuses to accept Hollywood's terms, Dave Chappelle's story asked an even bigger question. What happens when the biggest star in comedy simply walks away? The $50 million walk. In 2005, Dave Chappelle was the most commercially successful comedian in America. Dave Chappelle's show was averaging 3.1 million viewers per episode on Comedy Central. The DVD sales of Season 1 and 2 had generated extraordinary revenue. Comedy Central offered him $50 million for 2 additional seasons, but his reaction to that offer still has people talking till now. He walked away from the money and went to South Africa. The industry spent the next several years trying to figure out what had happened and whether it meant he was mentally unstable. The truth is, he was not mentally unstable. He was a man who had looked at the terms of what $50 million was being offered in exchange for and decided the exchange was not worth making. The moment that crystallized his decision has become one of the most discussed stories in the history of stand-up comedy. During the filming of a sketch, specifically a blackface sketch that Dave has described in detail in subsequent interviews and specials, a white crew member on the Dave Chappelle's show set laughed in a way that did not feel right to Dave. In his own description of the moment, the laughter landed differently than the laughter he had intended the sketch to produce. The comedy was supposed to be about something. The laughter felt like it might be at something instead. So, he stopped and took a break. He went to South Africa, where he could think without the pressure of the production schedule and the contract and the $50 million all pulling in the same direction. And when he came back, he did not come back to Dave Chappelle's show. What he came back to was his own sense of what he was doing and why. The question he had been sitting with, whether the work he was making was serving the purpose he intended it to serve, or whether it had been appropriated by the industry machinery around it and turned into something that served a different purpose, was not a question he could answer from inside the contract. He had to step outside it to see it clearly. When Dave eventually began speaking about this publicly, in interviews and in his stand-up specials, the account he gave was consistent. He said he had been doing sketches that he believed were challenging racism through comedy, using the dynamics of racial stereotypes and audience expectation to expose the absurdity of the prejudice itself. And he said he began to worry that the show had grown large enough that some portion of its audience was laughing at the stereotype rather than at the exposure of it. The comedy was right. Something around the comedy was wrong. He left. The industry's response to his departure was not quiet in the way that the response to Monique had been quiet. Dave's departure was public, dramatic, and impossible to manage silently. Comedy Central had $50 million invested in a deal that had just evaporated. The press was everywhere, and in the absence of Dave Chappelle's own explanation, which took years to fully emerge, the space filled with speculation about mental illness, drug use, and the various other explanations that get applied to black entertainers who behave in ways the industry cannot control.
Comedian Dave Chappelle left tens of millions of dollars on the table when he walked away from his popular Comedy Central show.
He spent years performing in small clubs sometimes, the kind of intimate spaces where he could rebuild his relationship with an audience on his own terms, without a production company's incentive structure shaping what the performance was supposed to accomplish. He was rebuilding from the ground up, the way he had done at the beginning, before anyone knew his name. Once Dave decided to come back, he wasn't coming back as the comedian who had walked away in 2005. He was returning with complete control over what he wanted to say, and someone was. The Netflix deal and the controversy that followed it. When Dave returned to large-scale entertainment, he returned on terms that were entirely his own. Netflix signed him to a deal that eventually became one of the most discussed in streaming history, not because of its financial terms, but because of the content it produced and the industry response that content generated. His specials, The Bird Revelation, Sticks and Stones, The Closer, generated the kind of controversy that most comedians spend their careers avoiding, because most comedians understand that cultural controversy is commercially and professionally risky. Chappelle walked directly into it. The Closer, released in October 2021, contained material about transgender people that generated immediate and sustained criticism from LGBTQ+ advocacy organizations, from some Netflix employees who organized public protests, and from other entertainers who felt the material crossed lines that comedy should not cross. Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos initially described the special as not crossing the line, and then, in communications to employees, acknowledged that some content had real-world impact on vulnerable communities. The resulting internal controversy at Netflix was described in extensive media coverage as one of the most significant content disputes in the streaming company's history. Dave won a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album for The Closer in 2023. He won the award despite the Grammy committee having initially removed the special from eligibility, a decision that was reversed, and despite sustained public criticism. The Grammy voters made their own judgment about what the special was and what it deserved. Through every controversy, one thing remained unchanged. Chappelle never stopped speaking on his own terms. That became especially clear when he stepped onto the NAACP Image Awards stage. What the NAACP Image Awards speech actually said. When Dave Chappelle received the President's Award from the NAACP in February 2025, the industry that had watched him leave Chappelle's show, watched the Netflix controversy, and watched him refuse every pressure applied to him across 20 years, was now watching him accept the most significant institutional recognition of his career from the organization that represents Black Americans. He explained at the podium why this award was different from the Grammys and the Emmys he had won and not appeared to accept in person. He said those other awards were from institutions. This award was from his people, the Black people, a community that had always been the actual audience for the work, regardless of whether the industry understood what the work was trying to do. And then he said the thing that landed differently in the context of everything that had come before it. He said it was a very difficult time. He told the room to feel strong and inspired and not discouraged. He said there was a lot of work to do, but that it felt good to know they were not in it alone, that they had each other. In any other mouth, those words would be a generic acceptance speech. In Dave Chappelle's mouth, delivered in February 2025 after everything he had been through and everything he had witnessed, they were a message. They were a message from a man who had survived what the industry does to people who refuse to comply, by rebuilding and refusing to let the industry's assessment of him become his assessment of himself. He was standing at a podium and telling the entertainers around him that the difficulty they were experiencing was real, that the industry was organized in ways that did not serve them, and that the only sustainable response to that reality was each other. If Dave Chappelle's speech offered a philosophy for surviving Hollywood, Monique's career became a case study in what that survival actually required. Monique's road back. Monique did not disappear after the blackballing. She kept working in venues and projects that the mainstream entertainment industry was not paying attention to, building a stand-up career and maintaining a public presence that did not require the industry's permission to exist. She launched The Monique Show on BET, which ran for multiple seasons. She continued performing stand-up comedy to audiences who had never stopped believing in her talent, regardless of what any studio's casting decisions said about it. She did interviews and talked publicly about names and events that most people in her position would have been advised to soften. She did not soften. In 2019, she filed a lawsuit against Netflix after the streaming company offered her a pay deal she described as discriminatory when compared with what male comedians and white female comedians had received for comparable specials. She named what she was alleging and stated it clearly. She had been offered $500,000 for a stand-up special, while other comedians like Dave Chappelle, Amy Schumer, Chris Rock had received deals worth tens of millions for similar content. She said the disparity was rooted in race and gender discrimination. Netflix disputed her account, and the lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but the public statement of the disparity, the willingness to name the numbers and name the problem, was itself a demonstration of the same quality that had gotten her blackballed in 2010. She was not going to describe the situation in terms the industry found comfortable. She was going to describe it in terms that were accurate. She also, in subsequent years, publicly reconciled with several of the figures she had accused of participating in her blackballing. Her relationship with Lee Daniels improved. She gave interviews in which she described the reconciliation process. She made clear that the reconciliation did not change her account of what had happened. The facts were the facts. The relationship could heal. The two things did not contradict each other. And she kept working. By 2024, she was receiving renewed attention from younger audiences who had discovered her story through the extensive online discussion of Hollywood blackballing as a phenomenon, and who recognized in her case the clearest available documentation of how the entertainment industry manages the people who refuse to comply with its unwritten expectations. The more people examined Monique's story, the harder it became to see it as a single, isolated case. That raised an important question. Who had been describing the same pattern long before Dave Chappelle gave it a name? The people who named it before Chappelle did. Monique and Dave Chappelle are the two most prominent examples of the pattern, but they are not the only ones. The entertainment industry's management of black artists who refuse to comply with its expectations is a documented history, not a conspiracy theory. Janet Jackson's career trajectory following the 2004 Super Halftime show, in which Justin Timberlake exposed her breast during a performance, generating the FCC complaint that became the most filed in regulatory history, was one of the most starkly asymmetrical outcomes in the history of entertainment industry consequences. Justin Timberlake's career continued. Janet Jackson was effectively pulled from radio airwaves across the country by an industry response that bore no relationship to the symmetry of what had actually occurred on that stage. The person who performed the action was promoted. The person to whom the action was performed was penalized. She spoke about it years later, and the clarity with which she described what happened to her career in the period following that Super Bowl mirrors the pattern that Monique described after the Precious campaign. Cat Williams, in a 2024 interview with Shannon Sharpe on Club Shay Shay that became one of the most watched entertainment conversations of the year, described the pattern with a specificity that generated enormous public attention, naming names, describing mechanisms, detailing the ways that the entertainment industry suppresses talent that refuses to be managed in the ways the industry prefers. The interview went viral specifically because Williams described the pattern with the directness that most people in his position are advised never to use publicly. Dave Chappelle, watching all of this from the position of someone who had experienced his own version of it and had survived by refusing to allow the industry's assessment to become his self-assessment, delivered his NAACP Image Awards speech from exactly that position of experience. He was not speculating about how the industry operates. He was describing what he knew from the inside, because he understood that the people in that room needed something they could hold on to more than they needed a description of everything trying to knock them down. By 2025 and 2027, Dave Chappelle was no longer just reflecting on his career. He was still actively defining it. So what did the next chapter look like? Dave Chappelle's career in 2025 and 2026. On January 18, 2025, Dave Chappelle hosted Saturday Night Live for the fourth time, opening 2025's first episode with a 17-minute monologue that covered the Southern California wildfires, Jimmy Carter's death, and Donald Trump's re-election.
Jimmy Carter flew to Israel, so everybody in the region was talking about a former American president.
In the combination of political commentary and comedic precision that has always characterized his engagement with current events. The monologue was discussed extensively in the days that followed, generating the kind of coverage that SNL hosts generate when what they say resonates beyond the show's immediate audience. He performed at the inaugural Riyadh Comedy Festival in Saudi Arabia in September 2025, an event organized as part of Saudi Arabia's Cultural and Entertainment Expansion Program. Human Rights Watch noted the event in the context of their ongoing documentation of Saudi Arabia's human rights record. Chappelle performed. His latest Netflix special, The Dreamer, released on December 31, 2023, debuted at number 5 on Netflix's viewing chart with 2.2 million views in its opening period. He continues to tour and perform, and it's obvious that what the industry attempted to do when he walked away in 2005 did not work, and now he's warning others. The NAACP Image Awards speech that Dave Chappelle delivered in February 2025 was not a speech about Monique specifically. It was a speech about the conditions that had produced what happened to Monique, and to Chappelle himself, and to Janet Jackson, and to every black entertainer who has discovered that the industry's rules are written for the people who built the industry, and not for the people the industry is currently profiting from. The warning he delivered was specific, even if it was not explicit. It was the warning of a man who knows from experience that the entertainment industry will tell you, when it needs something from you, that you are essential, that your talent is extraordinary, that your voice matters, that this project cannot be made without you, and that the same industry, when you decline to provide what it needs from you on the terms it has decided are appropriate, will demonstrate through the accumulating silence of unmade phone calls and unscheduled meetings that it can manage without you perfectly well. The warning was, know what you are dealing with before you deal with it. Know that the game exists before someone tells you that you didn't play it. Know that the people who will warn you about the consequences of non-compliance may also be the people who confirm after the fact that the consequences were applied. Know that you have each other, because the institution will not always be on your side. And knowing you are not alone is the specific knowledge that makes it possible to keep going when the institution demonstrates that. Monique and Chappelle kept going. The work kept coming. The specific quality that both of them share, the refusal to allow the industry's assessment of their value to become their own assessment of their value, is the same quality that made their work extraordinary in the first place. The industry needs people who have that quality. It also finds that quality genuinely difficult to manage. The history of what happens to black entertainers who exercise it fully is the history that Dave Chappelle was gesturing toward when he stood at that NAACP podium and said, "Feel strong and inspired and not discouraged. We have a lot of work to do. It feels good to know we're not in it alone." So what does Dave Chappelle and Monique's story really reveal about the entertainment industry? Were they simply paying the price for choosing principle over approval? And if you were in their position, would you have made the same choice? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.